The volume's
Right.
okay? Got it. I have this screen right in front. Okay.
او اشخاص بتحط عليك يعني حاجات اضافيه.
So I see we have
Zina Karan today. She joined newly, especially to listen to your lecture today.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I've seen Kelly on a few of the classes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And anytime you have any questions, please, let me know, and we'll try to address those questions. So this is the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And you know what, conversely, we could ask, why do good things happen to bad people? We not only ask that, this is a good person, and then this financial or health or relationship crisis, etc. So many things can be attributed to, a good person, and that question comes up: how is it possible? I think the first thing that we have to do in asking that question is we have to define what is good and what is bad. Because that's an important thing. Oftentimes, people say things just because they hear them and without giving it deep thought. So I'd like to throw this out to the audience. I'd like to ask you, what does it mean to you when you hear, why does a bad thing happen to a good person? And we first have to say, what is a bad thing, or what is the definition of bad? And the second thing we have to ask is, what is a good person, and the definition of good, especially in that context, because both good and bad are used different ways contextually, and that's just the way language works. If you have anything to do with language, whether you've taught a language or you yourself have studied a language, we've all have a mother tongue that we were raised in, more than likely. But when we think of words, we also have to look at the context of those words in order to make it, more accurate. I mean, because when you define bad, what the dictionary gives us in relationship to bad is failing to reach an acceptable standard, morally objectionable, disobedient, suffering, serious, and in a more theological perspective, going against God's laws. So these are some of the definitions that are kind of objectively applied, in the dictionary, and certainly it has one connotation or another according to context. So when we say a bad thing, what does that mean? Does it mean something that's morally objectionable happens to somebody? Does it mean it's the cause of suffering for somebody? Does it mean something very serious, or something that hasn't reached an acceptable standard? What are we actually talking about? How do you all think when we say a bad thing? Would you all vote for that which creates a suffering condition in our life? So are we asking the question, is a bad thing happening that's causing our suffering? Who would like to address that question? What is a bad thing in relationship to a person? What would you say? How would you define something bad that happened to you in the course of? Just think back in the course of your life, either present, immediate past, or long-term past. What is a bad thing that happened to you? Something that has really, traumatized you in that way. That is Anyone have any thoughts on that matter? Because that's the first thing. Kelly?
You have to deal with it. And when you deal with it, you learn from it.
Absolutely.
But I'm also on guard a lot. So my boundaries are pretty strict, but I'm open, but not that open because certain experiences just, but you learn. And if you don't learn, you got a problem. And even illness or financial things, you learn your lesson and you move on. You can't wallow in it.
So when you say a bad thing happens to me, would you go with the dictionary definition of saying something which causes you suffering, like to put you in a suffering condition, whether it be financially or health-wise? Like recently, I just got a knee surgery. Just had a couple of weeks ago knee transplant, partial knee transplant, and I wouldn't call it a bad thing.
It's a good thing.
It's because I'm suffering. When I move my leg this way or that, it's causing me pain and discomfort. But ultimately, I can't say it's a bad thing because the ultimate goal is a good thing. I've taken it on voluntarily because the ultimate goal is that it's a good thing. Yes. You have a question, response?
Yeah, any incident or situation that puts us in grief or uncomfortable situation which causes pain, we think why it's happening to us all the time.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the mood of this question. I'm a good person, and I think in general, you would all fall into that category, right? You would all say, basically, I'm a good person. So we define, and Vatsi came up with the contextuality of it's going to cause me discomfort, it's going to cause me suffering, it's going to put me in a situation that I really don't want. So that we could say, could generally address what is a bad thing. Now, what is a good person? Because, just think, if we universally apply that, in some cultures, things that are done by people are not considered bad things because culturally they're acceptable. Whereas in other cultures, you may do the same thing and, it would be not considered a good thing. So the term good thing also has to have some contextuality applied to it. If I'm a good person, now great philosophers like Plato and Socrates, Aristotle, from the Western philosophical vantage point, have dealt with that issue, what is good. And also from the Eastern perspective, we have Bhagavad Gita, which deals extensively with the modes of material nature. This is sattvic or good. This is rajasic or passionate. And this is tamasic, which is ignorant. And the Gita in the 14th chapter and the 18th chapter of the Gita, both those chapters deal extensively what is good, what is passion or creation, and what is ignorance. So we have that perspective, the philosophical, the yoga philosophical perspective. And speaking of yoga and philosophy, we also have Patanjali's perspective of what is good. Because Patanjali states that unless you are basically a good person, and he gives a list of 5 different qualities, as does the text Srimad Bhagavatam, they give qualities of what would be universally acceptable as a goodness or good person. For instance, Plato, in their world, he described good in this world would be good equals favorable character or tendency, agreeable, pleasant, true, honorable, and conforming to a standard. So he means good end and ethical, with the result of impacting the individual with ethical behavior that follows certain acceptable, morally acceptable guidelines. Whereas bad is, according to the same people, bad has a bad end, and it leads to unethical behavior, which means you transgress morally acceptable behavior. You go beyond it. You do things which, according to ethical behavior, according to morally acceptable goods and bads, the do's and the don'ts, you go beyond it. You transgress that particular law. Patanjali, so Socrates and Plato's definition of good is very, very interesting, because it very closely aligns itself with the nuance of definition of goodness from the Bhagavad Gita perspective. From the Bhagavad Gita perspective, good has two primary dimensions to it. A material dimension, in other words, something can be good from a materialistic vantage point, or something can be good from a pure spiritual point. And the Sanskrit that is used is sattvic, and sattvic means beingness or truth, living within truth, or living according to your being, your constitutional nature. That's what sattvic means. But according to Gita, there's also another dimension of goodness, which is higher. It's a higher dimension, and that's called Shuddha Sattva. And Shuddha means pure. So it means pure goodness. And I want you to listen to what Plato says about goodness from his perspective when he defines it. Plato says good is a perfect, eternal, changeless form existing outside of time and space. So Plato, from his definition, seems like it's more keenly aligned with Shuddha Sattva, or pure goodness. But I think in terms of the context that we're using it, we're not saying, why does a bad thing happen to a person in pure goodness? Because a person in pure goodness, according to Gita, never experiences good or bad. Alluding to what Kelly said earlier, it's less about what happens to you and more about how you respond to it. So that requires, from the Shuddha Sattvic platform, or from pure goodness platform, that requires a perspective that is changeless, eternal, pure, not conditioned by any sort of conditioning in this material world, etc. That would be more the pure goodness perspective. But this particular, what we're addressing here, is not talking about that so much. It's talking about a good person, a person who lives according to morally acceptable standards, ethical behavior, etc. That would be a good person. Sometimes when I give a lecture, I ask people what's their goal in life, and their goal in life is to be a good person. So you wonder, what do you mean by that? I mean, does a good person support animal slaughter? Would that person be a good person? An industry that literally slaughters millions and millions of other living entities. Is that a good person? Is that a definition of a good person? I think your general mass of people in society would say yes. I don't think a person who eats meat is not a good person, because that person could be kind to their family. Their person could be a good citizen. That person could be, helpful in so many different ways on so many different levels. So it's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about bad things to good people, what that actually means contextually. How are we applying that? And then again, understanding the various definitions or the ways that we could apply the word bad and the word good. But, getting away from the Western philosophers who categorize it as virtue, happiness, truth is quite often used in Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. They have a very high regard for truth, etc. So these are the kind of the lofty philosophical perspectives that are talking about, and it's echoed by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, where he talks about one can even engage in yoga, and if you're not clear on what yoga is from the philosophical and psychological perspective, yoga means the process or the system or the discipline that connects us to our true eternal nature. So what Patanjali is saying is you cannot even be on that road or be on that path unless you possess, you follow what he calls in Sanskrit yamas and niyamas. And the yamas are, these are kind of like universal applicable things that can be applied. He describes them as number one, first and foremost, ahimsa. That is first and foremost. You know what ahimsa is? Ahimsa means nonviolence. So from Patanjali's perspective, when you're a good person, you're not a violent person. A nonviolent person does not only mean that you beat somebody up, you abuse your wife or your husband, beat them up, or you beat your children up or something, or you're not nice to your neighbors or whatever, but it also means emotionally. It not only means nonviolent in respect to other living entities, but it also means how you treat somebody on an emotional level. Can you be violent to a person on an emotional level? You sure can. So what Patanjali says, a good person, a person who's creating within them a good environment, possesses the qualities of nonviolence, of truthfulness. And it's very interesting that he considers nonviolence more important. In other words, he puts nonviolence first on the ladder, above satyam, above truthfulness, because he says there is a situation where if you're truthful, you may hurt somebody. And there's a story about a Brahmin, a priest in India, and he was known all throughout the land as being a person who never spoke a lie. He always told the truth. One day he was home alone, he was doing his worship, and he hears a frantic knock at the door. He opens the door, and there's a man in great distress. "Dear sir, dear Brahmin, please help me. I'm being pursued by bandits, thugs, and they want to steal from me and kill me. Please protect me." So the Brahmin said, "Oh, please come in." Very gentle by nature. "Please come in." And he tells the man to go hide in the back. A couple of minutes later, an even stronger knock on the door, and he opens the door, and there's 4, 5, 6 bandits there, thugs. And they said, in a kind of a sarcastic way, "Oh, dear Brahmin, you are always truthful. Have you seen? We are looking for this one man who is on the road to pilgrimage, and we are looking for him. Do you know where he is?" So at that time, the Brahmin was in a moral dilemma. If he spoke truth, if he held truth as the topmost attribute of goodness, then he would have to say what? What would he have to say? He'd have to say to the thugs, "Well, yes, he just came here seeking shelter. He's in my back room." Or if nonviolence is a more important quality, then he would have to lie, which is something he never does, and he feels is morally reprehensible. So what do you think he did? Here he was, he's faced with this huge moral dilemma. Do I lie first time in my life? Or do I save this man's life? It's actually an open-ended question, because the answer is up to you to make you think, what would you do in that situation? So Patanjali poses that because he wants to show us why he put nonviolence ahead of truthfulness. Because in that situation, Patanjali and other great wise men of the ancient tradition of India agree, they concur that saving that man's life is more important than telling the truth. Now the Brahmin could succumb to his pride. Oh, I'm so truthful. I never told a lie, and I can't start there. And who else had that dilemma in the Mahabharata? Who knows who had that dilemma also? Who was always truthful, but then he was asked to tell a white lie, and he balked. He didn't do it right away. He eventually did do it. Who can tell me? In the Mahabharata, in the Battle of Kurukshetra. Anyone? No one? Yes, you can. I'm sure you can. Naranarayan, who was asked to tell a lie but never spoke a lie, and he hesitated at first?
Hare Krishna, bro. Yudhishthir Maharaj.
Yudhisthira Maharaj. Yudhisthira, right. Yudhisthira was famous for never speaking any untruth. But then what had to happen? He had to tell an untruth. Because why? Why Narayana Rishi? Narayana Rishi? Why did he have to do that?
Actually, he was truthful and he never spoke a lie before. But then later on, because for Arjuna, to fight with Dronacharya, and Dronacharya is like very difficult to fight with. So because Yudhishthira Maharaj told that Ashwatthama, the elephant, was killed. So he thought his own son is killed and he put down his weapon. So in order to...
Yes, because Dronacharya's son was named Ashwatthama. And Dronacharya was a very powerful warrior. He was actually the teacher of the warriors. So in this battle of good versus relative bad, the battle of Kurukshetra, the dilemma was there, how to defeat Dronacharya. And the only way, Krishna told Yudhisthira, the only way you can defeat, we can put Dronacharya in a weakened position is if you say Ashwatthama, who was Dronacharya's son, and he was very attached to his son, just like all parents are very attached to their children. Dronacharya was no different, and he had a great attachment for his son. If you tell Dronacharya his son has been killed, then he'll become morose, then he'll be weakened, he'll be vulnerable, and then Arjuna will be able to kill him in that weakened. Not Arjuna, it was Drishtadyumna, right? Yeah, Drishtadyumna will be able to kill him. And Yudhisthira hesitated at first, right? He didn't want to do it. But because he didn't listen to Krishna, the Supreme, his chariot, which was always off the ground, touched the ground at that point because he didn't want to do it. Well, eventually he did do it. And the way he did it was an elephant by the same name as Dronacharya's son was killed. So what Yudhisthira did is he said, Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. So when Dronacharya heard that, he became very morose. And at that time, Drishtadyumna was given the opportunity to kill him. Of course, we know, I don't want to go into Mahabharata stories, but we know that actually Dronacharya became so morose that he left his body. He was so powerful, a yogi mystic, that he left his body. And then, after his soul left his body, then Drishtadyumna killed him, chopped off his head. But in any case, this is the point between, when we say what is a good person, what are the characteristics, we see almost universally, whether it's Plato, whether it's Socrates, whether it's Aristotle, whether it's Patanjali from the Yoga Sutras, where he says that one, nonviolent, number one, truthfulness, number two, not stealing, which I find interesting, because if you're truthful, also you would not steal, but I think it's another nuance to truthfulness. Not stealing, number three, celibacy. And celibacy and renunciation of unnecessary possessions. Those are the 5 that Patanjali lists as being part of the good character. Now, what celibacy also means, again, it's a contextual thing. It means that if someone is in a renounced order of life, like brahmachari or sannyas, celibacy means abstaining from intimate connections with women. But it means for a person who is married, it means only intimate connections with your wife. That means you have to be loyal to your wife, and wife has to be loyal to the husband. And that is considered also from that perspective. So we see, what I'm trying to give you a sense of is that there's expectations when we say a person is a good person. There is a moral compass. There is something that by which you can gauge the goodness or the badness of a person. So now we get to the question: why do bad things happen to good people? So we've defined bad. A bad thing is something which causes us suffering or some high degree of discomfort, like that. Some illness, some money problem, some relationship problem, could be with your spouse, could be with your family, some family member, could be with your child. So some way it could go like that. So why would a bad thing like that happen to me? I'm living a good life. I'm fairly truthful, and I'm really not violent. I don't emotionally cause any violence to anybody, and I don't physically beat up anybody unless I go to martial arts class, and then you have license to do it in martial arts class. But if you don't go to martial arts class, you don't physically beat up your children or your spouse or your neighbor because your neighbor's son's soccer ball went on your front lawn. Nothing like that. So we basically have this sense of why do bad things happen to good people, and we can extend that to why do bad things happen collectively to a collective group of people. That's an extension of that question. In other words, 250 people are on a plane, the plane goes down, they all die. Collectively, one bad thing affected 250 people simultaneously. So we have the singular thing of bad thing happening to me. I got sick, I got financial problems, I got this, I got that, and I'm basically a good person. But you look at the list of passengers, and probably all those passengers thought themselves to be good people. One bad thing happens to 250 people simultaneously. There's a plane crash, or there's a pandemic, where whole people in a village gets ill and many people die. So why does that happen? Why? So bad things, good people, doesn't make any sense. The way we're going to address that, because the only way that you can address that is you can either just say The world's a cruel place. The world is an unfair place. There is no God. You could say that. Or you could take the position of Harold Kushner. I don't know if you know the name, but he was a rabbi, and he wrote a book entitled That. Why do bad things happen to good people? He took a very interesting position. He was trained as rabbi. He went to the seminary, trained, practiced, counseled, did all the duties of a rabbi. And he lost his boy at the age of 14. The boy was 14. So he could not cope with, why would God allow this thing to happen to me? He was a rabbi. He considered himself saintly, in that regard. I don't know if saintly would be the way he would, but he would probably consider himself a good person. And then his 14-year-old boy dies from porphyria. It's a genetic disease. And he couldn't grasp it. He couldn't cope with it. So basically, what happens is you either become atheistic, deny the existence of God, everything is random, or you take a kind of a middle road position like Kushner did, because he was so much a religionist, a Jewish rabbi. He couldn't totally deny God's existence, but he came up with this rationale. God is benevolent. God is kind. But God is not all-powerful. Or at least he chooses not to be all-powerful, so that evil will occur, bad things will occur. That's the way he tried to rationalize. So we said 2 ways you look at it. Atheistic, there is no God, everything is random, it happens to me, things happen and there's nothing you can do to check it, nothing you can do to understand it. It just happens. Or Rabbi Kushner's perspective, yeah, God's there, he's a God, he's kind, he's a loving God, but he's not all powerful. Either he chooses not to be all powerful, or the fact is he's not all powerful, which has no consistency with either his book, his religious book called the Torah, or the Bible, or the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita. There's no consistency with that. That's not the definition of God. Certainly from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita, God is considered omnipotent. He's an omniscient. He's all-knowing and all-powerful. So then the question will arise, then if he's all-knowing and he's all-powerful and he knows these things are going to happen to create suffering in humanity, why does he allow it to exist? Why does he allow it to exist? Would God just choose not to arbitrarily deal with the laws of nature? Would he choose that way? And for what purpose? So that's the second perspective. So the third perspective, and I tell you, I sit here, and even though I am a follower, I'm a devotee of Krishna, and I've read Bhagavad Gita many times, and I am a true believer in the potency of Gita. When I was in a less committed position, prior to that, when I was in college, between the years 1968 and 72 is when I was in college, I read Gita, and I could say myself to be objective at that point. It was the only objective explanation that I could see. Karma. I didn't feel, I had a Catholic upbringing, so I didn't really feel that there was validity to atheism. And the Kushners trying to define away God's shortcomings, I felt that, who are we to do that? What potency do we have that we can actually look at God and know him better than himself, or better than those who have dedicated their lives in purity to him? No. So how can I adjust like that? So I couldn't accept that. So even in a more objective position, I was willing to consider the logic of karma. And it is a very profoundly logical perspective to look at why suffering occurs to most people in all statures of life, good, bad, or ugly or not ugly, beautiful, etc. You may have lived a most charmed life, and thing could happen to you that is astonishing. I can tell you, this is a very sad story. You'll have to excuse me if I start crying, but it's a very personal story to me and my family. I have an older sister that we're very close. She's 6 years older than me, and we speak almost every day. And my sister gave birth to 4 boys in the course of her marriage, and she lost 3 of them at different times of her life. It wasn't one fell stroke where they were in a car accident and they all 3 died. At different, one 9-year-old, he was 9, the other one was 14, and the other one was 19. All out of 4 sons that she bore, 3 of them passed away different times, spreading that suffering over the course of maybe, I want to say 10 or 15 years. So I admire her. She's one of my heroines, because how did she come out of that? She came out of it looking at herself. She came out of it looking at herself saying, I must have done something in my previous life. And she's not a devotee of Krishna. She has Bhagavad Gita, she's read Bhagavad Gita, but she certainly, I wouldn't consider her, committed to the process of bhakti that we follow. But logically, when she met with her priest, she was raised Catholic also. She spent 2 weeks with me at a Krishna ashram, Hare Krishna ashram. And she came out of it of her own accord and saying, that there must have been something that I did in my life that warrants me to suffer. And then one person asked her, because she did some grief counseling for parents that lose their children. And one of the most frequently asked questions to her is, how in the world did you cope with that? And my sister has a very simple answer. She said, I asked God for strength and he gave it to me. That is how I coped. And that is the only explanation. Whether I'm religious or not religious, I asked and God reciprocated by giving me the ability to cope, not only cope, but to live my life and to try to enjoy the relationship I have with my surviving son and his children, et cetera, et cetera. So for her, it was a path of suffering that brought her to the logical understanding or explanation that I must have some responsibility in all this. And she didn't do it in a depressed way or a belittling way, just blaming, I'm blaming myself. No, she did it after she meditated very deeply from different traditions perspective, meditated deeply on what can be the logic behind that kind of suffering and that kind of insanity. And logically, she came up with karma. It must have been, as we know, what is the law of karma? Karma literally comes from the root Sanskrit word krit. So karma, it means action, relative to action. And I like this definition that a friend of mine, a sannyasi friend of mine, gives to karma. Listen to this and see how you resonates with you. Karma refers to the cosmic system that reacts to our free acts. So this is indicating that we have free will to act. Cosmic system that reacts to our free acts, delivering to us a fair, commensurate, consequences. In this way, this is what I really like. In this way, the universe holds up a mirror to each and every soul. Selfish acts, which is karma and vikarma, by which we cling to the fruits of our action, are binding. They bind us to this world. So karma, action that has reaction, has 3 divisions to it. Actions which are considered bad, they go outside the moral compass of ethical behavior, dharmic behavior, and that's called vikarma. That means bad action, bad end, bad reaction, some point. And there's interesting too, because there's different grades of action. When you talk about bad action, it's not like everyone gets hit with life sentence suffering, because you can have different degrees of suffering, or different degrees of perspective, when you're dealing with something. There's a story about 5 friends, and they come upon a beautiful grove of mangoes. I remember one of the times I went to India, in Mayapur, West Bengal. There is a Jagannath temple, and it's a good distance from the Mayapur Chandodoya Mandir, but you have to walk this long road. And when we were walking along the road, we passed this beautiful mango orchard. It was very beautiful to behold. So these 5 friends found this mango orchard, and they go into the mango orchard, and they want to eat the ripened fruit. So each of them gives a perspective on what you should do to get the fruit. The first one says, kind of a harsh tone, he advises, just cut down the tree, we'll get all the mangoes. The second one says, why cut down the tree? Just break off one big branch. The third one says, why saw off the whole branch? Just break off the part where the mangoes are. The fourth one, after hearing the first 3 propositions, says, why not just pick the mangoes? We don't have to break a branch. We don't have to cut the tree down. Why don't we just pick the mangoes? So that was the 4th perspective. And the most sensitive perspective was the 5th friend, who said, why not just take the ripe ones that have fallen on the ground? So we see 5 perspectives on how to approach something. So there are also nuances of approach and activity. How do we approach something? So sometimes, if we do some small transgression, the recognition of that transgression may be enough to rectify yourself and do away with any reaction to that small transgression. But as you see here, you get more and more serious, or in this case, you got less and less violent, then the result is there's no reaction to it. So in karma and vikarma, good action, bad action, both are considered karma bandhana. Karma bandhana means actions that bind you to this world. So even from a relative sense of goodness, from a morally ethical sense of goodness, you are acting in that particular way. You still have to come back to this world, samsara, and experience the reactions to those actions of goodness. Now one may say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. If I've got good things in my karmic bank account and I'm going to experience pleasure from those, well, that's not so bad. But the bad thing is you're put into that you remain within that law. It's actually called the law of karma. Just like, who was it, Newton and the law of gravity? He discovered the law of gravity. So the great ancient sages observed that there is law of karma. And even if you have good karma, bad karma, then invariably you have to experience the karma, which means samsara, the wheel, the cycle of birth and death you have to come back to. And what's so horrible about that? Well, as long as you're acting under the law of karma, that you could perform bad activities and perpetuate the bondage that is there, the karma bandhana, actions that are binding you to this world. And one of the unique attributes of this world is suffering, misery. So it keeps you in that place of suffering and misery, which I think when we look at it, who wants to suffer? When you go out on a picnic, sometimes, we're so blessed here. We live in South Florida. I don't know, Kelly, where do you live? Do you live in South Florida also? So we're blessed with beautiful weather and beaches and nice parks, so many wonderful things that we can go on a nice picnic pretty much at any given point in time. Do you go on a picnic hoping that once you spread the lunch out on a nice blanket and you sit down to eat that lunch, that all of a sudden a swarm of red ants come and start biting your legs and your arms? If you've ever had that happen, you know how much suffering that is. I've certainly had it happen on a couple of occasions. Or you're sitting, one time we went, when I was living in New York City, we went to Prospect Park. We had a whole big picnic. We were doing kirtan. We had a picnic, and all of a sudden, thunder, black clouds, lightning. And you may say that doesn't sound so bad, but it was pretty scary because the light, how when lightning and thunder are right above you, it has a significantly more dangerous sound, and a person actually got hit by lightning that same day that we were there. But is that what we look for when we do actions? No, we don't look for that for actions. We look to do actions that will give us a positive result. So karma, action, reaction, we understand that there's a third facet to action and reaction. Everyone must act in this world. Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita. Even Krishna has to act. Everyone must act in this world. But if you're able to act and see your action as an offering to the Supreme. Now, if you are a Krishna devotee, then Krishna. If you're a Christian, then Lord Jesus Christ. If you're a Muslim, Allah, Jehovah, whomever you identify in that position, then that the motive or the intent of your action, whatever it may be, whether it's working, raising your family, sustaining your body, etc., all can be seen as an offering. And as Kelly so astutely observed in the beginning, she said, really, it's not about action, reaction. It's about how you respond to the reaction. So from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita, it's action, reaction. We're going to get reactions. But as long as you're under the law of karma, then you're going to incur both good reactions, bad reactions. And Gita leads us to another division of action, which is called akarma. And akarma means you act, and there's no reaction to your action, because now you move to a different mindset or a different consciousness. And what is the mindset or the consciousness at this point when you choose to act in this way? And that action, a karmic action, is basically called bhakti yoga. You choose to dedicate everything that you do, all yat karosi, yat ashnasi, yat jahosi dadasi, yat, all that you do, all that you offer, all that you give away, all austerities that you may perform, you do that as an offering to the Supreme Lord. And that action then falls under a different category of action. And that category of action is called akarma. And akarma means action with no reaction. So what happens when we reconfigure our life in such a way that all that we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, all charity, austerities that we perform are done as an offering to the Supreme Lord? We reconfigure our life. Our mindset is different. And then we're able to cultivate exactly what Kelly said in the beginning. We're able to cultivate proper response to actions, whether they be bad things happening to us, good things happen. Because Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he's very clear. Who is the person that's eligible for mukti, for liberation from this world? That person that is steady in both bad things that are happening or good things that are happening. Person who is in a suffering condition or a person who is elated. In all conditions relative to this world, we see all that we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, etc., as an offering to the Supreme. And therefore, what is our response? Our response is yoga, according to Gita. What does that mean? It means stability. When Krishna first defines yoga in Bhagavad Gita, it's samatvam. I think it's the 48th verse of the second chapter. His first definition is samatvam, which means stability or even-mindedness, or not being disturbed in distress or not being disturbed in happiness, but remaining stable and steady. And actually being able to cultivate an awareness level where we understand, and this is my mantra, and you can use it if you like, that Krishna doesn't allow things to happen to us. He allows things to happen for us. So whether something is considered good or bad, one who recognizes the logic and the principle of karma recognizes that this is actually for my benefit. I may not understand it now clearly, but I'm going to respond in an equipoised way because I know ultimately that this is for my benefit. And I've heard so many people give testimony to that. So one lady, after being married for 18 years, her husband left her. And she was so distraught. Now, this is some years after that occurrence, but now she's situated on a spiritual path, and she's happy. So she sees, and to some degree, that did work out in my favor. It gave me an opportunity to take shelter where I should take shelter, in the Supreme, the lotus feet of the Lord. And in my sister's case, certainly that was a horrible experience, a traumatizing experience, but it gave her the opportunity to seek shelter where there was no other opportunity for shelter. And that was in God. In her way, she asked for the strength to cope with this trauma, and God did. So she's convinced that he's listening. You just have to make the endeavor. So we come from different angles of vision, some different perspectives, but this is one perspective. that I think brings sanity into a picture like that, brings sanity into a situation where something really bad happens to you and you're trying to understand why, the whys and wherefores. That there is a lesson in life that is meant to teach me. The universe has designed the law of karma in such a way so it holds up a mirror to us, to each individual. You have the parents that you have because you deserve them. And they have you because they deserve you. Now, whatever that means in your individual case, because, a lot of people had hard childhood. So that's what it means. It means whatever situation that you have, you earned it by virtue of your actions. And actions and reactions, reactions you can compare to a seed. What is the seed? It's the potential to sprout. And what happens to that sprout? That sprout has the potential to grow into a tree. And then what happens to that tree? That tree has the potential to produce fruits. So when you perform a karmic activity, you're planting the seed. Then as time wears on, you may continue to water that seed with similar actions which are causing similar reactions. And so it'll sprout. And eventually sprouting, growing into a seedling, and growing into a tree, and then producing the fruits. What are the fruits? The fruits are the karmic reaction that you should be experiencing. So that is the design of this world as it is, karma, and we can get rid of karma either through knowledge or the performance of bhakti. Bhakti, in the execution of bhakti, we perform the execution of bhakti, and what it does is it's like taking seeds that have the potential to sprout and putting them in an oven. The seeds are there because of the heat, the fire of the oven. The seeds won't ever sprout. So putting ourselves in the fire of bhakti, it causes the seeds of karmic reactions to be minimized minimally and maximally to be taken away. So I think I've run out of time. So does anyone have any question or comment? There's an interesting conversation between Bhishma and Yudhisthira. And Yudhisthira talks about despondency in life. And Bhishma's response is, there is no cause for despondency in life. No matter how trying circumstances get, if one, through understanding destiny as God's beneficent and absolute will, it does three things, then one should do three things. One should bow one's head in gratitude, respond in righteousness, and do so under one's qualified mentors, thus extracting the fruit of destiny, a personal realization, elevating one to a better life. So, here's a quote from Rumi, the great Sufi poet. Rumi says, when providence seems to be digging a hole to throw us in, it is actually planning to quench our thirst by drawing water from the ground. So we can look at digging a hole in two ways. Oh, I'm going to be thrown in this hole, or, oh, I'm actually digging a well, for not only for my benefit, but for the benefit of my village. Okay. Anybody would like to give a comment, a question, an observation, a realization? Now's your time. Make sense what I said? Anyone disagree? Is anyone more towards the atheism approach or Rabbi Harold Kushner's approach? God's limited or limiting himself? Or
It-
all, yes. Yes.
Thanks, Prabhuji. It was a great eye-opener. But the only concern I have is whatever I did in the past, I'm suffering today. So
Right.
right now, I'm trying to make sure that I do the right things so I don't suffer in the next birth. So I have a question that if I am attached to something or someone, will I be connected with them in my next birth?
Possible. What is Krishna saying in Gita? What one contemplates at the point of death, one will achieve. So if you're really attached to someone and that someone is attached to you, there's a great possibility that you can reverse roles. Why? Because if you're meditating on your husband, then you're meditating on a male form. So you'll go into a male form because that's your meditation. And if he's meditating on his wife, like I had an aunt and uncle that were married for 60 years, 60 years, and they were always together. And when my uncle passed away first, and my aunt was so attached that all she could think about, and there's statistics that show when people have strong bonds, strong relationships, and their spouse dies ahead of them, they usually die within a year.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Statistically, that's there.
Yeah.
Especially if you grow old together. So yes, you can you can have connection with them in the next birth, but you may not like your husband as your wife. You may not like your husband in that mindset. So why risk it? Why not become Shuddha, pure? And do you know what Prahlad Maharaj says if you become pure? That 21 generations of your family, both in the future and in the past, are liberated along with you. So why not do that and have all your family attain the spiritual realm rather than coming back? That's the great incentive of bhakti. That if you can practice bhakti as a family, your husband, your children, all of you, husband and wife cultivating within the hearts of their children a deep affection for God and service to God, that is the best thing that you can do. There's Shreyas activities and Preyas activities. One is immediate result and the other one is long-term result. So as Vaishnavas, we take into consideration to act in a way that has long-term results also. I mean, we also may act in a way that has a short-term result. Certainly if you put your child, if you're diligent in putting your child through good educational system, there's a short-term and a long-term benefit to that. That's okay. But what I'm saying to you is, why run that risk of reuniting in other bodies in this world? You never know what the circumstances will be and how the consciousness that you carry along with you will be affected by changing your gender. Really. So it can happen, but you should strive in this life to become pure, purify the heart, and save your family, your whole family. Kelly, did you have a question? Kelly? Do you have your mic?
Unmute yourself.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, she's on mute. Kelly, can you please unmute yourself, Kelly?
Unmute yourself.
Yep.
There.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, two questions.
Go ahead.
When you say that when people have a loss, someone near to them dies, or something tragic happens to somebody else, my first question is, why are we putting it all to us rather than what is actually happening to the people that we love? It just seems strange that we're saying, oh, it happened to me. No, it happened to them. And the second is a silly question. Chances of me coming back as a cat.
Not if you're listening to these classes. Your consciousness will be so elevated because you have such nice sangha with these the devotees that speak here. But to address your first question, and I don't know if I got the question right, but I was going to bring up that point because it's an excellent point, or at least a point I perceived there, that karma can seem to be cold, but karma does not eliminate the need for compassion and empathy. You see that? It's not meant to say, "Oh, okay, your spouse died, your child died, or your mother died, or something like that. Don't worry, it was their karma. Their spirit souls. They're coming back." No, there should be some immediate feeling of emotion, out of love.
Yeah.
If you have a loving relationship, you should have that, and you should honor that. But ultimately, which will get us past that, the grief. You can't stay in grief forever. Why? They would not want you to, number one. Number two, it's not good for you. It's just not a good situation to put yourself in. So the karma dimension of it is more for the long-term benefit of being able to cope with that loss. But the short-term reaction should be one of compassion, love, attachment. Those are perfectly normal things. So I don't know if I exactly addressed your question, but go ahead.
What I mean is when these things happen to people that we love and that are dear to us, it's their karma, correct?
Right.
That is causing the
Yes.
tragic situation.
Yes.
And we can't control that at
No.
all. We can just show compassion, but it's not about us.
Right.
It's really about them.
It's about us being able to show compassion to them for their loss. It's not like all about, you may have a friend and a mutual friend that you really cared about. So the friends will all feel like, oh, I'm not going to see him again or her again. She's such a great person, and I really loved being in her association. You could feel like that. So in that way, you are experiencing the loss, but the karma, is happening to them, and more, as I said, on a nuanced level. It's more profound for people who are very close to them, like their parents, for instance, or their spouse, or their children. It's close to them in that regard, closer to them. So yeah, you very, very good observation, very astute observation. Thank you for that, for sharing that.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to listen to this lecture. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for attending. Yes, Kokila.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. A very, very nice class, opening up so many things as others said. The quick question I have is, when we start doing the right things, yamas and niyamas, following the right things, and really trying to be in the mode of goodness. If you see in the life of Pandavas, what happened to Draupadi, for Kunti, they were so devoted to the Lord, but they still underwent a lot of hurdles. And in the life of devotees, if you see so many things are happening, even though they are devoted, so how can you bring some light on them, Prabhu?
Yeah, because look at Draupadi, what she experienced. What did that do? That was Krishna giving her a greater opportunity to call out for him. What was the difference between Draupadi's reaction in that assembly hall and Yudhishthira's reaction? Do you know what the difference was? Kokila?
Yeah, Draupadi was totally surrendered. She totally.
Yeah. She totally surrendered to Krishna. And what was Yudhishthira's reaction? I got to win this next match. You see? And Krishna later informed them, where were you when all this was going on? Krishna says, I was right there. Draupadi called me, you did not. You just kept playing the gambling match and you lost everything and created so much suffering. So the difference, so that pastime is to show us that Krishna is giving us opportunities, God is giving us opportunities, and how do we use, like Kelly said in the beginning, how do you respond? If you respond by recognizing that there may be some lesson in this for me, then that's proper response, and you'll see your way clear through the dilemma, through the problem. But if it's like, why, I'm going to do it, I'm going to resolve the issue like Yudhishthira. He kept playing and playing, and he was losing, and then ultimately he lost Draupadi, then ultimately it was his brothers, and, he just kept losing everything. And when Yudhishthira said, where were you? Krishna says, I was there. And Draupadi called for me, and you didn't. So who chose that path? You see? And the same thing falls on our shoulders. Who choose? You, and you only, are fully able to respond to what happens to you. And that is the opportunity that Krishna is giving you. To respond, just to respond properly. And why do we study this philosophy, Bhagavad Gita philosophy, whatever philosophy we are studying? To understand the true nature of the soul and to realize there is no end. We are eternal beings. And what is the suffering? The suffering is psychological. That's the pain is there, but suffering is optional. Like I have pain in my knee at every moment now, whether I'm sleeping or awake, etc. But suffering is optional. I could be sitting down and saying, oh, why me? Why is this operation so painful? And I can get depressed and I can lose energy, etc. Or I could just experience the pain and my suffering is optional. If I want to perpetuate in my mind suffering, what does suffering mean? It means I'm self-centered. It means I'm focusing on me and only me. The fact that I'm here with you all has relieved the whole class, no suffering. Why? Because I'm with you all. And you all are giving me a chance to expound this philosophy. So Krishna is giving me some respite. He's giving me some relief. Probably when I get up, I'll feel it again. But suffering, that's optional in our pain. We choose it or choose not to suffer. Choose just to see it as it is, whether it's financial or relationship. We always do. And in the Bhagavatam, it describes how there's a verse, Tate nukampanam susamikshamanam. Right? You know the verse, Naranarayan? So you remember that verse? Tate nukampanam.
Sushamikshamana punjayate mam trikam vipakam. And then last part I also forgot. Sorry for that.
But it basically means that while I'm experiencing my karma, while I'm going through that, I'm not going to lament that. I'm just going to continue with my service. I'm just going to continue serving God. And what does Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita? Who is the sadhu? Is the sadhu only a person who doesn't engage in sin? Do you know what sin, what the literal translation of sin is? I found this very interesting. Someone was saying something. Sin in English means without wisdom, without knowledge, without intelligence, without good sense. In Latin, S stands for sine, which is Latin for without. And celus stands for heaven or without, heaven or not heavenly. Also, sin is defined as mistake, missing the mark, or error. Well, who's not going to make a mistake in life, in the course of our life? So Krishna recognizes that in the Bhagavad Gita. He doesn't describe the sadhu, apichet sudaratram. He doesn't describe the sadhu as someone who's faultless, doesn't make a mistake or an error or in judgment in life. He describes that even when he does, he's able to focus on surrender, on service to him, no matter what. That is what is described as sadhu. And that is for us. For us is not to determine whether someone is a sadhu or not. For us is to determine my perspective. How is that devotee behaving? What is the character, true character of that? So thank you all I guess we're a little over time.
Thank you so much for
Thank you. I appreciate spending time with you all. Familiar faces and new faces like Kelly. Thank you all for coming and participating. And I'm always at your service, so you just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
so
Prabhuji.
Wonderful class.
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, one question before you go. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
One question, like you mentioned one sloka of Bhishma Dev, where you mentioned 3 points. One was gratefulness, then the response, and learning from the mentor, I believe. So it is part of the Bhishma Dev's prayer and Yudhishthir Maharaj's dialogue, Prabhuji?
Yes. Yes, I think it's in that section.
In that section.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. And it was a wonderful class. You have mentioned some of the personal stories or life happenings to you as well. It was very inspiring. And this definitely a question comes, and how can we bring about the real devotee out of us? Otherwise, like following rules and regulation, we lose that characteristic of a devotee from our heart, and we just blame on karma or something like that. So thank you so much for sharing that as well.
You're welcome. Thank you too. Thank you for the opportunity to have your association.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Bye.
Hari Hari.